We're delighted to welcome to our studio Admiral William J. Fallon, former commander of U.S. Central Command and currently Robert E. Wilhelm Fellow at the Center for International Studies at MIT. It's wonderful to have you at the studio. Welcome, Admiral Fallon. And it's nice to see you in civis this time.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
There's been quite a persistent report that you had some different view about Iraq than the policy that was adopted. And there was a report that you thought that the pace of withdrawal should be accelerated than made so slow as it was adopted. Now, are you happy with President Obama's withdrawal plan?
Well, I think, first of all, the stories that circulate in the media, in most cases, usually have some element of fact and some that's just absolutely not true or not accurate. And that's just the way things are because people are taking other people's opinions and comments and rarely the first person that counts. In terms of the pace of the withdrawal, the real issue was then and still is, in my opinion, the job that needs to be done, and that is to maintain, first back a couple of years ago, to really establish security and be able to turn the responsibility for that security over to the Iraqi security forces. And so you always have an element of uncertainty. If we knew all the details and how things will unfold, it would be pretty easy to make decisions, but you never do. So we were trying to, in my opinion, shoot for to estimate the amount of time it would take to have the place in good enough condition to turn over. And at the same time to be sensitive, at least at my level, in some other realities. Certainly the opinion of the American people, the likelihood or not of the Congress taking steps on their own to direct a certain level and pace, and all manner of other things, such as the other requirements we had for forces and capabilities within the region that I had a balance. And so as I looked at these things, I had made up in the back of my mind kind of an outline of where I thought we ought to be. Of course, I wanted to hear General Petraeus and his team from inside the country and what they had, and then to weigh off in my mind the imperatives that would be coming from General Petraeus with these other factors that I thought. So as I sketched out where I thought we probably ought to be as we projected, it's coming out to be pretty close in the main as to the rate at which we're coming down. I had some difference, certainly in total numbers. Most of that had to do with the support footprint that we had in country. The number of combat troops was pretty, maybe not easy to discern, but General Petraeus and his team had a pretty good handle on that. It was some of the rest of the footprint that that added to this aura of a large number of troops, and since people were counting back in those days, maybe getting some of that out would make things a little more palatable. But as things have turned out, of course, once we really were able to get security pretty well established, number of casualties came down dramatically. Interest waned dramatically, and as you know now, just recent poll, where is Iraq and the priority of things that are on your mind, it's not at the top or anywhere close to it. So I think things are coming down in a reasonable fashion. You're still shooting for some target. The number one objective still maintain security and try to turn this over in a manner that makes sense. So I think we're in pretty good shape.
Would you agree with some of the critics on the Democratic Party's left side who are saying that the number of troops that will be left, non-combatant troops that will be left behind would be still too high, 50,000?
Well, there are two issues, I think, in here, and both of them are really off the mark. There's a group of folks who don't want any part of it. They just want everybody out right now. And the only way you're going to make them happy is to have everybody leave tomorrow. not a great idea, particularly where we are. There's another group that either doesn't understand or doesn't care to understand, or is disinclined to support the idea that we want to have a long-term relationship with this country. And the process of going from where we are now to something in the future is going to entail some number of U.S. personnel to help the Iraqis to get where they need to go. They have a lot of capabilities right now that we provide. There are a lot of capabilities that we provide that they don't have. Very tiny Air Force, intelligence support, things like that are really going to be essential for them to be successful in their security.
To train them in those areas?
So some of these things have to stay. And again, it's very interesting. A couple of years ago, we were trying to estimate where this number would be. The number that I had in my mind and jotted down was very close to the number that's envisioned right now. And there's some factors as you look at things that you might have to do, how many people it really takes to work in a country this large, what kind of support things you need. It's the number's probably about right. Again, we're still a year out from that now. That number may be adjusted as things move forward, but I think that the arguments are this general, just we've had it out of here, which has been persistent for some time now, and it's just not very realistic in the case that we really are.
One of the reasonings, I think, when you argued for a somewhat a sort of faster withdrawal was to focus more attention on Afghanistan, because this has been your concern that Afghanistan was being neglected in order to maintain this large presence in Iraq. Now, in the light of what has happened in Afghanistan, what do you see the additional U.S. troops that are now going to be deployed in Afghanistan? What are they going to do? What will be their mission?
First, I'd comment on the neglected, not my choice of terms. I know a lot of people have used it. Again, there's a political dimension to this that's been around for some time. We were not able to provide all the things that the commanders would have liked, that I would have liked in Afghanistan, simply because we had, and I agreed that we had a higher demand signal for Iraq. It was the more burning issue. It was the one that had the largest impact on us and on the region, and so and the one that needed the help more significantly back a couple of years ago. So we did what we had to do. If we had the additional forces, it would have been nice to be able to send them to Afghanistan. And the number one need on my wish list was for people to do the training. We needed more folks because the big picture in security, at least from my view, has been get the Afghan security forces trained to be able to take care of business in their country. They want to do it. It'll be better for us and for the people of that country if that's what happens. But this doesn't happen overnight. You can't just wave a wand and there's very little infrastructure in place. We had to basically start from scratch and build it. So this is a process that takes time, and we could probably accelerate this a bit if we had ample numbers of folks, of the right people, to do the training. Since then, there have been some deterioration in the security situation in various places in the country. That needs to be addressed, and so there's a little more of a demand signal now for troops. But I think we have to be careful of the numbers here.
But you have been to Afghanistan many more times than any other senior military official. The report one gets is that Kabul has become basically the repair of the Afghan government. The rest of the country, 70% of the countryside is under Taliban control or influence. If that is the case, how was the United States or NATO forces are going to roll this back?
Well, first of all, I don't accept that vision. I find, as I look from afar, and I'm not there, haven't been for some months now, but it's almost as if it was just woe and despair in Iraq. Everything was wrong. It was bad. Now it's not anymore. So now we have to look and find something else that's wrong. And I attended a conference a couple of days ago in which I was struck by the hand-wringing about Afghanistan, about how bad this is and that is. And I said, I just don't share that view. A lot of things need to be fixed, but the place isn't, I think, about to roll over and go belly up tomorrow. There are lots of areas in the country that are not in a state of turmoil. There are many issues that have to be addressed. And I think that now a lot of people are certainly paying attention to it. I know within the U.S. government there's an effort in several quarters underway to look at the things that are at play here and to try to come up with a better way to address them given where we are today. One thing I think it's important to remember, certainly was the case in my experience in Iraq. People would hear the term Iraq and they would immediately conjure up an image of something. But given the fact that we've had quite a number of years of going by since 2003, and in Afghanistan we're back to 2001, the situation today compared to last year, year before, significantly different. And before I think folks are too quick to start prescribing solutions or proclaiming the way things are, I think it would be appropriate to really focus on things today as opposed to the past. And there's some trends that are moving in the right direction, some not so. But to get an accurate assessment, I think you need a view of today and not yesterday or yesterday's problems. So there are a lot of issues. Remember, this is a country, first of all, it's very different than Iraq, and drawing too many similarities, I think, would be a mistake from the start. And we could spend a half an hour talking about those, but I won't do that. But there are a lot of things that this country has going for it. Number one, the people. They're tough people. They've been used to deprivation. They've been used to eking out a living with minimal resources, and so they've figured out over the centuries how to live in this kind of an environment. Not saying they like it, but they're used to it. But they see glimmers of things that would be different than the way they've lived, not least of which are education. They recognize that the vast majority of people, in fact, are illiterate. But another major factor here, as people constantly talk about the Taliban and the resurgence of the Taliban, it's my very distinct impression from many interactions with Afghanis all over the country that they don't like the Taliban. And the majority of people have no desire to go back to anything resembling Taliban rule. They had a dose of this and they didn't like it. They know what kind of oppression these characters will inflict on them. So, you know, there are a lot of things that are ascribed to the Taliban that I think are probably a little bit of overzealous painting of a picture to try to fit somebody's image.
But two things.
Go ahead.
One is the fact that the supply line from Pakistan to Afghanistan has been interdicted so often that it is impairing the ability of the NATO forces to operate. And secondly, the rising tide of opium production, which has made Afghanistan the world's largest opium producer. 93% of opium is produced in Afghanistan, which in turn gives the resources to the Taliban to buy weapons.
Sure.
So these two, how do you resolve these two issues of
Well, the business of supply lines. Afghanistan presents a little different challenge than Iraq in that for Iraq we had effectively a superhighway from neighboring Kuwait, which enabled us to move very large amounts of material by land into the country. And we had some other avenues too, and numerous air bases that you could fly high priority cargo and people in. It's different in Afghanistan. It's much more difficult. But I would tell you that from my experience, the level of violence that we had to endure back in 2006, early 2007, in moving things on the ground in Iraq was very high. It's nowhere near that in Afghanistan. Certainly there are interdictions. Certainly there are problems coming through the mountain passes from Pakistan. It's not easy to get things into the country. But the overall level of violence compared to Iraq, and this is, again, don't want to draw too many comparisons because there's so many differences, isn't in the same ballpark. That said, attention has to get paid to it. There were no roads. There are all kinds of things that are different. There were no roads at all in Afghanistan to speak of prior to 2002. That's being addressed by the international community. It's a phenomenal benefit to the country. We benefit certainly from having better highways to move our things, but as I have watched this country develop, wherever the roads have gone in, it's been just astounding to see the blossoming of economic activity among the Afghan people. Your second point, the business of opium. There's nothing new here. This has been the pretty much trade and stock of the country for centuries. It is, by all accounts, the number one economic factor, and it's used by not just the Taliban, but by most other folks in the country one way or another. It's not what we would like to see. The leaders, the majority of the leaders in the country recognize this. We've had several not very successful international efforts to do something about this. Lots of chatter, but when people actually get there and see how difficult it is, it becomes more of a challenge than people envision. It's not going to be resolved overnight. It's an issue. Corruption's an issue. It is all over this part of the world. There's no surprise here. And it'll have to be addressed by the government and by others in charge. It's not going to change overnight, but I think it's one of the major issues that we have to take on.
But the issues that are...
But just to say, because there's a heavy heroin or cocaine trade, means that this is the reason the Taliban are there. I think the Taliban and their cohorts or those other instigators of instability are certainly taking advantage of this to fuel their needs. But what I've seen in the country is very interesting. In those provinces where there seems to be significant progress, the thing that makes a difference has been leadership. Whether it's the governor, the provincial council, certainly working with the central government to really address the problem. In those areas where there seems to be success, there's a direct tie to leadership. So finding good leaders, encouraging them, supporting them. Everybody needs a helping hand, sometimes stronger than others, but this would be a thing that would be very good. There are other provinces that have very, very little problem with drugs, and some of it's just because they're not in vulnerable areas. Others because they have leaders that recognize it and they don't want it. And,
mostly in the southern Thailand, in Helmand.
Sure. It's up the Helmand Valley. That's the primary area.
Yeah. Now, talking about leadership, one of your first tasks as the commander of Central Command was to go to Pakistan and try to dissuade General Musharraf not to declare emergency rule. And since then, the country seems to be kind of imploding politically. Yesterday, there was an attack on Sri Lankan cricket team in Lahore, which was pretty devastating. Now, and Pakistan has now become the refuge for the Al-Qaeda. And the latest report is that the 3 Taliban groups in Pakistan are uniting to actually fight the Americans in Afghanistan than operate in Pakistan. Now, this creates a situation which is certainly not very good for the United States or for anybody. What would be your suggestion? What should the U.S. do to save Pakistan?
There's a lot of work underway. There's not a lot of deep thought, I think, required to, first of all, recognize the problem. You can't separate Afghanistan from Pakistan and just deal within the borders. The tremendously significant Pashtun overlay, tribal overlay between both countries puts a very interesting dimension into this. The leaders of Al-Qaeda have been alleged for quite a few years to be hiding out in these ungoverned areas, the tribal areas in western Pakistan, up against the Afghan border. Very, very tough terrain. Without a strong central government in Afghanistan for years, with the approach in Pakistan being to keep hands off the Fatah, and a system that's been in place for hundreds of years now. There's essentially no government rule in this area, and so the local tribes have done what they've seen fit, and little interference really from the outside. So this is going to be a significant challenge to get at this, but recognize that it's really maybe 2 countries, but essentially the same problem. I think is the first order of business. And the second would be that within Pakistan itself, the traditional focus of the security forces was certainly not on this internal insurgency. In fact, it was on India. And the history of conflict between the 2 countries led to a mindset that the problem was always in the East for the PACs. I don't believe that's true, and I believe the leaders in Pakistan, at least when I was the ones that I was dealing with, President Musharraf, General Kiani, I don't believe they accept that anymore. They think, as I do, that things have moved on. Everything isn't square between India and Pakistan. There's still a long way to go, but clearly the leaders on both sides have been moving this in a very positive direction, step by step. It's tough because there are people who are hell-bent on upsetting this and pushing it back the other way. But for the PACs to accept the fact that the bigger problem in the country is now this insurgency is a significant mindset change. That's one thing, to their credit, that they do it. I think they recognize it. Second thing, to actually deal with it is another matter that's very challenging. Military changing from a focus from large-scale land warfare, fixed armies, large units, more conventional, to one in which you have to deal with a very difficult, elusive, non-traditional, asymmetrically different challenge is something that takes time and takes a lot of training. So this is not going to happen overnight. I think the pieces are trying to be put in place, and one of the things the U.S. can do is, of course, try to help these forces.
This use of drones inside Pakistan, the last, I think, since September, there have been more than 30 attacks, which has, of course, had some success in knocking out some of the foreign fighters in Pakistan, but it has made U.S. more unpopular than ever. Now, how do you resolve this issue of fighting the leadership of Al-Qaeda hiding in these areas without hurting Pakistani people?
I operate under the theory that you're never going to have all the people happy all the time. No way. I think this is an issue of priorities. There is a grave threat already amply demonstrated to not just the United States, but democratic people throughout the world that emanates from this group of folks that are hell-bent on imposing their vision of the world on the rest of us. If there is intelligence, it seems to me, and I think we have to be a little careful. There are a lot of things that have been ascribed to drone attacks that have maybe not been, shall we say, documented by government authorities anywhere here. But accepting this generally, there's a need from time to time, or I suspect there's a perceived need, recognize that I'm not part of the process anymore, that you may have to act in some circumstances, that the potential for negative activity, either in the region or outside, may dictate a sense of urgency that you need to do something. And trying to keep pressure on these people is really important. We are buying time, I think, in several respects. One, for the forces, the security forces in Afghanistan to grow competent enough to really be aggressive in their border regions. Same time, changing the PAC capabilities from one that's focused, again, on this main battle kind of idea to one that's going to be effective in dealing with them. PACs have made several forays back into these areas with some success. They've paid a high price for it. So it would seem to me as an outside observer now that this is an area that needs a lot of work, and it's not going to happen overnight. So meanwhile, just giving people a free rein, and there's little doubt that there are some bad actors mixed in amongst these tribal people who have been given support and shelter for various reasons. Probably don't know all the details. So I think you're going to find that we'll probably see judgments being made regularly here on just how much pressure of what kind to try to disrupt the potential for very, very serious attacks. And as the PACs, Pakistani people and leadership have now discovered, it can be very, very hurtful. You look at the assassinations, the other attempts, the other bombings, this tragic thing with the Sri Lankans just yesterday. And so they'll have to deal with it. It'd be wonderful for all concerned, certainly from our view, I would think, and the PAC's view, if they could deal with this stuff themselves. We have a way to go.
In February 2007, the U.S., I think, Bush administration was proposing to increase the carrier battle group from 2 to 3 in the Gulf, and you are reported to have said no to the additional 3rd carrier battle group. And the reason for the administration attempt to increase the battle group presence there was to basically send a signal to Iran that they should not pursue with their nuclear program. Now, if you did oppose this additional battle group, what would have been your reasoning?
Well, some of these things are still best left in the realm of things that maybe we'll talk about in the future because of some classification and intelligence issues. But generally, as I looked at decisions within the Central Command region in terms of forces, I was keen to, because of the cost of doing business, both with wars ongoing in Afghanistan and Iraq, that when we made an operational move, that we were getting some value, return on our substantial investment. I happen to be one that's very keen to periodically assemble significant capabilities for a number of reasons, to demonstrate to ourselves that we have the ability to operate in the sizes and differences in capabilities that we don't routinely get to do. Also to demonstrate to interested parties or people who should be interested in the region, both friends and allies, that we have these capabilities that are very robust, and to those who might come up with bad ideas, that we have significant capability and we are very flexible and we can move things pretty rapidly. And so it's a judgment issue on timing, of intent and ability to pull together things. And so I was, again, a lot of this chatter in the media was just people looking for political justification for their views. But if you go back and look at the record with me, I've been pretty strong in having the flexibility. Did I think we needed things to be just hanging around? No, I'm not one to just put people. I've spent too many years, too many months and weeks in my own experience of kind of twiddling thumbs while somebody tried to make a decision. I like the action part. Move them in, demonstrate what you need to do, move them out, go put them somewhere else. There are lots of places. The demand signal for aircraft carriers in the world is unending. Yeah. And when I was in the Pacific, I was always trying to convince people to move some of them in significant numbers out there. So I think a lot of this, again, overblown, Nayan, but there are certainly signals to be sent from time to time, and we have a need periodically to demonstrate our capabilities.
Your friend Admiral Fallon has said recently that Iran does have enough enriched uranium to actually produce a nuclear device. That being the case, how does the United States or the world community bring Iran back to compliance with IAEA?
Probably one of the top issues on the agenda for this administration and for others in the region. I think it's a challenge to deal with these guys for many reasons, not least of which is we've had 30 years of basically silence, official silence between them. Lots of chatter, but no dialogue. Little doubt in my mind that the Iranians are pursuing an objective of trying to get to nuclear weapons capability, which is not going to be good for anybody in the world that I can see. A lot of motivations for this, and we may be part of the problem, but nonetheless, it's been their activity in pursuit of this goal, as well as some significantly other disruptive activities that's really been a problem, and was for me during my tenure and remains. So we have to take these into consideration, it seems to me. We would like some of this activity to stop. We would like the push for nuclear weapons to stop. We'd like their activities to destabilize Iraq and Afghanistan to stop, as well as their use of surrogates in Lebanon and in Gaza and other places. Really unhelpful. I think the administration right now is trying to figure out a way to get in some kind of a dialogue that makes sense. The idea that we're suddenly, some of these discussions in the media are interesting. We're going to be at war, we're going to be at peace, we're going to talk, or we're going to fight. This is nonsense. In the business of international diplomacy and in strategic military affairs, you have an array of capabilities which you try to use in proportion that it seems appropriate at the time to get your point across. At the end of the day, you'd like to have people convinced that there are things, behaviors that are in their interest as well as your own that can be helpful to them in their vision of the future. Finding the key to open these boxes with Iran, I think, is going to be a challenge, but I think there's a lot of help in the region. They have been destabilizing to the point where few of the neighbors find themselves on their side in arguing for any of the things that Iran seems to want to do. At the same time, there's some other folks that have been standing on the sidelines that I would expect, you've probably seen in the media in the last couple of days, that we'd like to get some other people to play a hand here. So exactly which works, I don't know. I would expect that we would probably pursue several avenues here simultaneously to see kind of where there might be some movement and to get them to start playing a role. This can't be a one-way street. It's going to have to be a dialogue.
The last question, while you were in commander of the Pacific Command, you actually argued very strongly and you won the case of starting a military-to-military dialogue with the Chinese. And you will be, I think, I'm happy to see that it is actually happening now with this and the new administration. But given that Japanese are so concerned about sort of the Chinese claims on their territorial waters, etc., how far the U.S. can go in being cooperative with the Chinese without antagonizing the Japanese?
Lots of frictions and anxieties in Northeast Asia, if we just stay in that part of the world. I pushed to renew or to ramp up the level of activity, military to military, because that was the very obvious lagging part of the relationship. We have extensive economic, commercial, political, cultural, education, you name it, other ties with China. Mill-to-mill has been a real problem. And the immediate issue back when I was in the Pacific Command can be traced back to 2001 with the collision between the U.S. reconnaissance aircraft and the Chinese fighter. So things just went to zero. Not in the best interest. Again, we had 30 years of non-discussion, non-dialogue with Iran, and we find ourselves in both of us in a pretty good hole now. Didn't want to get there with the Chinese. But I think we have to constantly assess where we are, be looking at intentions as best we can determine them based on actions that people take, and do our best to have real experience rather than just to make assumptions based on distant observation or secondhand reporting. Of course, lots of people tend to see this as a zero-sum game. So you move closer to China, then you must be going to be distancing yourself from Japan. And I heard some of this. I was in Japan recently. I picked up some of the anxiety, tried to allay those concerns, and I think Secretary Clinton's recent visit was designed to do that in part too. The relationship between Japan and China is very interesting. Certainly lots of friction, but China's benefited immensely from Japanese investment and economic activity in the country. There's a lot of potential to deepen that, just as there's a tremendous additional benefit that could follow from Taiwan PRC enlargement of their ties. That's moving in a positive direction today. So there's going to be a lot of concern. There is a lot of concern right now because of the fallout of the economic and financial crisis. Everybody's nervous. But I think one of the encouraging things to me is that so far, most of the leaders in the world recognize how interdependent we all are, and that any actions are going to have to be well coordinated with others in the world. And that's a good sign. It's going to take a lot of work. But from this very traumatic experience of today, it's my hope that we might be able to learn and take advantage of this situation, which has now leveled some of the bumps around, to move forward together, to find ways in which we can positively cooperate to solve some of these enduring problems, and at the same time kind of ease some of the long-standing tensions. But it requires engagement, it requires initiative, and hard work. Nothing happens by magic.
Well, on that note, Admiral Fallon, thank you so much.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.